We definitely had inflation, but Joe Biden didn't pass tariffs that actually, with his own policy, actually increased prices for people. And I think what's really stunning is that 1 year in, Donald Trump's approval on economics is actually now.
This segment centers on an appearance by Anj, where she found herself directly opposing during a lively panel discussion. The exchange wasn't just another roundtable, it was a sharp clash of perspectives, with Vigeland pressing her case while Jennings leaned into a confident, dismissive posture that shaped the tone of the debate. We'll be breaking down selected moments from that panel, which featured Vigeland, Jennings, and several other contributors, to understand what was actually being argued and what was being said. Beyond simply replaying the highlights, I'll walk through how the conversation unfolded, where the arguments landed, and why certain reactions mattered more than others. So let's pull up the clips, watch how the dynamics played out in real time, and then unpack what this exchange reveals about the broader political conversation taking place on cable news right now.
Together.
And if you have a problem with the economy, it's the other guy's fault, the last guy.
We inherited a mess, affordability, but you can call it affordability or anything you want, but the Democrats caused the affordability problem, and we're the ones that are fixing it.
Remember when Trump said this about his tariffs back in April?
Maybe the children will have $2 instead of $30, and maybe the $2 will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally.
Well, it is officially doll season, and a growing number of Americans are actually struggling right now in this economy. A new Fed survey found more Americans say that their finances are, quote, much worse now than they were a year ago. And they don't expect it to get any better in the next year either. Trump's approval rating on the economy has plummeted 15 points since he's taken office. And despite the president saying that the economy is great, he's now giving a $12 billion bailout to farmers who were hurt by his own tariffs. Justin Amash said this, a former GOP representative. He said, Trump swipes money from taxpayers to bail out the farmers who were harmed by the tariffs that Trump himself placed on American businesses and consumers. This is the Trump economy. Senator Flake.
Can't argue with that. On tariffs, tariffs are inflationary. That has been a GOP article of faith forever. And it's true. And we're finding that out. There's been some time to get there, but we're there, certainly. And I think that next year it'll even be worse unless there's some reversal on tariffs. We've seen bits and pieces shift, certain sectors exempt and certain countries exempt, but overall it's starting to bite. Consumers are paying more and they're feeling it. Yeah, and you can't tell them otherwise.
Well, yeah, and Trump is not only trying to tell them otherwise, but is also not acknowledging what his own actions are showing, which is that he's bailing out farmers, rolling back some tariffs on food items. Those seem to be clear acknowledgments that the tariff policy has hurt Americans.
Well, I think on the agriculture piece, there's a couple things going on. One, right up front, Trump said the tariffs were going to cause some short-term turbulence or pain for some sectors. He acknowledged it. Agriculture has felt that a little bit, the row crop guys especially, but of course they solved some of that with the deal they cut with China. So actually was in...
Did they solve that? Because I mean, I don't think we would...
Oh, yeah.
I don't think we would be talking about a $12 billion bailout, well, A, and B, the amount that China has bought is not anywhere near what has been promised.
Okay, so they cut a deal with China, and they're in better shape today than they were when we didn't have a deal with China. So that's number one. Number two, I was in Texas Saturday night with the Texas Farm Bureau, spoke to a lot of farmers down there. It was interesting. There were some people that absolutely had concerns. In fact, I talked to one guy who was going to the White House meeting today, and they were glad to get invited to that. I think they feel like what the president's doing on the ag thing is responsive to them. They have concerns, not just tariffs. They're a little worried about the Argentinian beef issue as well. They threw that out. So, yeah, I mean, he's got some issues to work out. But overall, if you look at the Fed survey, people are happy and excited about the job market and the labor market in the United States. That's a good thing. And if you talk to Scott Bessent, he'll tell you that they think in 2026, we're going to see a boom in jobs and growth in this country, thanks to some of the structural changes they made this year. So they're expressing optimism and exuding optimism, and that's what they got to do going into an election.
There have been more than 1 million jobs lost so far this year, a number that basically rivals the pandemic time. So there is a picture of the economy that we're not getting from the federal government numbers, because those numbers are by and large not coming out. But from private sector payrolls, jobs are being lost right now, right at this moment.
We've seen actually for the first time in years, actual job losses month after month, revisions showing private sector job losses. And I think that is driving a lot of anxiety. And it comes at a time where the facts are that the tariffs are causing middle-class families, working-class families, to pay more money. They're $1,700 estimated by the Yale Budget Lab of how much families are paying more for the tariffs. And so I think what's really odd is that the president promised that inflation would come down on day one. He'd get rid of it. And instead, he went on this policy that I agree is just different from what Republicans have supported for decades, which is raising prices on people. And of course, the whole issue with the bailout of the farmers is if we didn't have these actually counterproductive tariffs, you wouldn't have to take taxpayer money to actually bail them out, because China's response on the soybeans is because of the president's tariffs policy.
I know all of human history started in January of this year, but I could take you back 4 years when input prices for agriculture, from fuel to materials to you name it, went through the roof. I know you know a little something about it because you worked under Joe Biden when it all happened. So these farmers, they're in a 10-month period here with Trump, but they just came out of a 4-month period where they were dying under the inflationary and affordability crisis caused by Democrats. They support this president. They like what he did today, and they're going to give him a little latitude to get out of the mess.
I don't think that's accurate when you hear from farm bureaus.
You don't think it's accurate that inflation happened under Biden?
I'm sorry, Donald Trump talked about, we definitely had inflation, but Joe Biden didn't pass tariffs that actually, with his own policy, actually increased prices for people. And I think what's really stunning is that 1 year in, Donald Trump's approval on economics is actually now worse than Joe Biden's. So all you want to talk about Joe Biden, the fact is people hold Donald Trump responsible because it's his policies that are adding to the burden on families.
One of the recurring frustrations with Izzatone, he brings into these discussions an air of self-assurance that often substitutes for substance. Watching him on, it's hard not to notice how frequently the conversation gets dragged backward. Almost any topic, no matter how current, somehow turns into a detour through previous Democratic administrations. The moment pressure builds, the reflex kicks in, invoke, reference, or even resurrect grievances tied to, and it's a familiar pattern deflection dressed up as comparison. What makes this contrast especially clear is how differently the panelists operate. When progressive voices step into these conversations, they tend to ground their arguments in verifiable details and concrete evidence. The emphasis is on what can be demonstrated, not just what feels persuasive in the moment. By comparison, the self-styled facts over feelings crowd often ends up doing the opposite, leaning heavily on emotion, instinct, and rhetorical nostalgia rather than engaging the issue as it exists now. There's also a performative element that's hard to ignore. Jennings' habit of locking eyes with the camera, as if addressing viewers at home directly, feels less like coincidence and more like calculated theater. It's almost distracting, raising questions about whether this is spontaneous behavior or part of a conscious strategy to project confidence and dominance on screen. Either way, it reinforces the broader dynamic at play. Style taking precedence over substance, and spectacle replacing serious engagement with the facts.
Joe Biden, David Axelrod writes, Donald Trump recaptured the White House in part by relentlessly exploiting Biden's failure to heed widespread concerns about the rising cost of living. And now, bizarrely, President Trump is walking himself and his party into the same perilous trap by denying the economic reality that working families are living. It's kind of hard to argue that when, in some ways, Trump is literally saying a lot of the same things, that people are just not feeling it. They're just not seeing how great it is, or that we just have to remind them that this is a PR problem and not an actual economic problem.
Well, Abby, I think we should put some of the president's comments into context. I think he is taking some of the celebrations on the prices that have come down, like we've talked about on your show before, prices on fuel, certain food items that are in fact coming down. And I think this Scott's absolutely right. We should celebrate the fact that Americans are looking at this job market and saying we have a better chance at getting good, high-paying jobs and being able to support ourselves and our families. So, look, this is a reality that the American people are facing. The vice president came out and said stick with us, give us some time, show a little grace on this issue. The president has said, hey, we're 11 months in.
Why should they show
and I think, and I do think.
That's the part I don't understand.
Well, and I do
Less than
think,
1 year
why
should we show grace?
I honestly want to know.
Grace. We ask
I'm
for the same
curious.
grace.
I want to
live in
know.
a
we
snap
suffered,
election
This is
system.
as we
President.
suffered through 4 years, as I've said before, and I'll continue to say,
to your
as the worst
point,
inflation in
to
my
your-
lifetime.
to your
and
point,
many Americans' lifetime.
This is a
And big
president who
inflation
came
on day
into
one.
office and he said, this is going to be my top priority.
Yep.
That you all are suffering under the inflation of the Joe Biden administration. I'm going to fix it. I'm going to fix it on day one, he says. Why should then Americans, almost a year into this thing, turn around and say, well, you know, you've raised prices on us through tariffs, but we're going to just give you some grace? That doesn't make any practical sense, and it doesn't make any political sense.
Would it make any sense to go back to the people who caused it in the first place?
No. Well, if you ask voters, it's funny
tariffs.
because if you ask voters, how much do you blame Trump for the current rate of inflation? 59% say a great deal, a good amount.
Well, he's the president. He is the head that wears the crown.
Exactly. He is the president.
But why
That
go
is
back to the
point.
people with the shovel
That's
digging
the
the
point,
hole?
Emma.
To note that the inflation that occurred under Biden was in part naturally occurring due to supply chain bottlenecks and because the COVID once-in-a-lifetime pandemic
Naturally?
occurred. And yes, it occurred.
Like we're on trees? Or?
Yeah, okay. So, because of supply chain bottlenecks. That's what I'm talking about. There was a labor
Policy
shortage
choices were
because
made.
of COVID.
Policy choices
And then there
were
was this
made.
thing called greedflation, which was called a left-wing conspiracy theory. But then we saw record returns for corporations in their earnings, which showed that even though prices were going up, they were still taking home record returns, these corporations. And in part, the Biden administration tried to address that with lean econ and more enforcement. Now Trump's in office and there are no cops on the beat. We just hit a record of credit card debt in this country, over $1.2 trillion of credit card debt. We just hit a record in terms of subprime auto delinquencies, showing that people are really hurting. And there's something like the top 1% owns 50% of all stocks and trades. This is an income inequality problem as well as
Trump
a tariff
is also
problem.
blaming greedflation now for rising costs. And so, to your point, it was considered just sort of a Democratic talking point. Now Trump is doing the same thing. Again, you're seeing the same patterns playing out. And just for people at home who are just like, look, it's getting more expensive to live, they're not buying it. They weren't buying it with Joe Biden, and they're not buying it now.
The striking thing is, Republican tax and regulatory policy has been good for the economy. Even with that, you see huge inflation because of tariffs. But President Trump's signature economic policy was tariffs. I love tariffs. It's the most beautiful word in the dictionary. He goes on and on about it. And then when tariffs cause inflation, then he tries to say, no, they don't. But tax and regulatory policy has been favorable for business. But it's the uncertainty and the higher tariffs that are hurting the economy. And that's why the president is running away from it at certain times, or he'll exempt certain sectors or certain countries. But it's going to hurt coming into the elections, believe me, unless there's a reversal.
What stood out to me in this exchange is the rare moment of honesty from acknowledging that tariffs were harmful and tying them directly to credit where it's due. That admission matters. But it also highlights a familiar pattern. Many Republican figures find their candor only after leaving office. It's hard not to wonder whether those same words would be spoken with the same clarity if political consequences were still on the line. That contrast becomes even sharper when it enters the discussion. Her contributions are grounded in evidence, figures, trends, and verifiable data presented calmly and methodically. While she's laying out that information, repeatedly interrupts, layering commentary and performative reactions over her explanation. The imbalance is obvious. She allows him to finish his points, even when they drift into praise or generalities, yet she's rarely afforded the same courtesy while presenting specifics. What's missing from Jennings' side isn't confidence or airtime. It's substance. You never see a chart, a table, or a clear breakdown that could be checked and debated. There's no moment where a concrete metric is in comparison of inflation rates, no documented price trends, no source data to scrutinize. Instead, the argument leans on impressions and often circling back to familiar names, rather than engaging the evidence being presented in real time. I don't think Jennings lacks intelligence, and I'm not convinced he personally buys every claim he advances. That's part of what makes this dynamic frustrating. When someone like Vigeland shows up prepared to discuss facts, the format turns her presence into a missed opportunity. She gets a narrow window to contribute meaningful analysis, and much of it is drowned out by interruption. That's become a recurring feature of, and expecting a different outcome at this point may be unrealistic. What I'd genuinely like to see is a structured, one-on-one debate with firm moderation, no crosstalk. no interruptions, where both sides are required to respond directly to the same set of verified data. That kind of setting would clarify very quickly who's prepared to argue from evidence and who's relying on vibes. I'm curious how you saw this interaction. Did anything said here genuinely change your perspective? What's your take on Vigeland's approach versus Jennings' style? This clip only represents a few minutes from a much longer episode, but it captures the broader dynamic pretty clearly. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you're finding value in these breakdowns, a like and subscribe helps the channel keep growing. I appreciate you being here, and I'll catch you in the next one.